that moment where you're just like, 1, 2.
Alright. Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, you can go.
Okay, so hi, my name is Mina. So I'm going to be doing my presentation on chapters 1 through 5 from a Pacific Islander perspective. So I was actually gone for a week at an MPI site. So my thing is trying to relate into these chapters into the MPI site. And if you don't know what the MPI site is, it's a Native American and Pacific Islander summer intensive program. So you go out there for a week and you learn about things about being indigenous, things about being native, things about being why it's important for you to be a Pacific Islander or native in your area of study. So in my presentation, a lot of the things that I'm going to relate to, it's not going to be examples from the book. It's going to kind of be more examples from my personal experience and also from Native and Pacific Islanders. So that's why I put that it's from a different perspective. So chapter 1. So chapter 1 is on diversity in the United States. And basically what the book says is that it classifies minority groups having 5 defining characteristics. And some of the characteristics are listed below. For example, they have a pattern of disadvantage, the identification by some visible mark, aware of disadvantage, memories are determined at birth, and you tend to marry within your group. So in relation to Pacific Islanders, I think this is true in some sorts. I think, for example, number 5, marry within the group, that relates a lot to a lot of the females. In Pacific Islander culture, a lot of them would rather have them marry in the group than marry out, because then once you marry out, then you lose your culture. It's very important to us to have a lot of these things keep within our culture. Like we have a lot of sacred items and we have a lot of things that end up becoming a norm for us. So marrying within the group would be an example of that for us. For us Pacific Islander women, it's more acceptable, more susceptible for you to marry within the group. If you don't, it's okay. It's just a lot of poly parents would rather have you marry within the group. Membership determined at birth. I guess that's kind of the systems where it's like you're born into what you have. So for example, if I'm born into poverty, basically I'm gonna grow up being impoverished. And I don't know if that's a word, impoverished. Aware of the disadvantage. So obviously you're aware of yourself being, you don't have a lot of money, right? So growing up, a lot of the Pacific Islanders grow up living below the poverty lines. It's not like a lot of them, like how it says that you're kind of, once you stay in that system, you're in that system for a while. So that's kind of where it's at with Pacific Islanders. A lot of them are born into the system of being born in poverty, so a lot of them don't really come out of that. Stratification. So stratification has 3 different dimensions: class, prestige, and power. Class, how much money do you have? Prestige, how well are you at your job? And power, how well are you able to demand your control? So in the context of Pacific Islanders, a lot of them, class, they live below the poverty line. Prestige, they kind of work the regular jobs. They're not up there at the top being the CEOs of businesses. They're not really up there. They're kind of at the bottom. They're kind of like overlooked. And then in terms of power, I think power is different for us in ways because we have we don't have a hierarchy system, but we do work in terms of having a high chief. So that's kind of where our power comes from, is one person delegates the whole village as a sort. And then these are some other things that are related to diversity as well: prejudice, discrimination, ideological racism, and institutional discrimination. So for prejudice, being prejudiced is a thought, right? That's what we talk about in classes. Prejudice is a thought and discrimination is acting on it. So that is kind of the difference. For prejudice thoughts, that's kind of like a stereotypical view, like, oh, all Pacific Islanders are all big and things like that. That's actual thought. But discrimination is actually like acting on that thing that you think that they are. So for example, if you actually think that all Pacific Islanders are big or whatever, a discrimination would be, hey, like, you guys should come and perform, or you guys should all come and do this, or something like that, asking them to come and be like, kind of like a mockery, like a showcase, for example. It's kind of different in some ways, and like, not a lot of ways. It gets particular in some sorts, but it's kind of hard to explain right now. And then ideological racism is knowing that it's being in the know that you are knowing you're being racism, but you don't really care. And then institutional discrimination, that kind of speaks for itself. And then another part of the chapter 1 talks about is it doesn't really talk about this, but I just wanted to include it in my slide anyway. So the class system, achieved status, and caste system is described. So basically, the class system is you being born into that role, and then being able to come out of it. So, for example, if you're born into poverty, if you're born into having low income, you're able to come out of it. And then caste system versus scribe status is if you're born into that, you stay into that role and you don't really come out of it. And a lot of Pacific Islanders kind of face more of the caste system, where they kind of stay into that role. They don't really do much to come out of it because they're still trying to make money to get by. That's kind of just how it works. And then the Karl Marx theory, he argues that the important source of inequality of society is on the, the system of the economic production. So basically how well that things are going is gonna separate them. But then Max Weber argues that the social class was a result of the social economic position. So basically, however the world is going at the moment is, so say people are all living in poverty, for example, gentrification, right? So in the Bay Area, a lot of people lost their homes, a lot of people lost their jobs and everything. Why? Because a lot of big businesses were moving in. And that theory kind of results into the Max Weber theory, where a lot of people start moving out, moving in and stuff like that, because it was the result of the economics. Everything was booming at that time, and sorts in relations to like technology and stuff like that. So chapter 2 is on, I think you can kind of like, yeah. So chapter 2 is on assimilation and pluralism. So assimilation is the distinct and separate groups come to share a common culture and merge together socially. So there's different types of assimilation. There's the melting pot theory that everybody knows everybody and everyone gets along or whatever. And then the Americanization is kind of conforming yourself into the westernized culture so that you can be more into an acceptance. Same thing with the Anglo conformity. And then there's also pluralism, where you maintain your identity and remain separate in cultures and social differences persist over time, so everybody gets along with everybody and knows the differences. It's kind of more diverse. In terms of this, I think it's important to note that in the book it states that they use Native Americans as an example of assimilation. However, it says that, oh yeah, the natives were assimilated into their reservations. But the natives were actually forced assimilated to go there. They didn't have to go there, but they were forced to move there. So I don't think that was a good example for the book reference to use Native Americans as that, because Native Americans were only forced to get moved into those relocations, and the land that they're having is small and it's not really a good type of land. So pluralism, I think that's where, so I think both assimilation and pluralism are kind of examples of the loss of culture that we experience in Pacific Islanders communities. For example, a lot of us today, our generation today, don't know how to speak fluent Samoan, and that's because of the assimilation that we have and the Americanization. A lot of us don't really know our full heritage and our full culture because we've assimilated so much into the Americanized culture that we don't know our own. So that's kind of part of the reason why I try to study about mine, is because it's not taught well enough in my house, because the Americanization and everything else has came into thought. Pluralism, groups maintain their identity or remain separate in cultures. I find this it's hard to find, but it is still out there. For example, an example of pluralism would be in a classroom where you have different identities, different cultures coming in at one spot, respecting everybody and stuff like that. That would be a good example of pluralism. Can you scroll down a little bit so you can show the different types? So there's different types of pluralism. There's cultural pluralism, structural, and enclave minority groups. So cultural pluralism is when groups have not a culture and each maintain its own identity. Structural pluralism would be culture differences are minimal, but the group occupies different locations and social structures. And then